In this room, we've got to work together to be the team that we can Stop it. Throw it to the end zone for Robinson. A touchdown. We come to practice, we practice hard. We tell you we be honest and and we gonna make games, bro.
All right, what's happening, everybody? It is another Commanders Film Room Tuesday, easily the best day of the week. We appreciate all of you joining us along for the ride today. As always, is George Carmy, Mark Bullock, gentlemen. We're here to discuss my personal favorite for head coach today, Mike MacDonald. Before we do that, though, it was a great press conference today. I know both of you watched it. I'll save my opinion for last. George, what were your initial reactions to the press conference? 26 minutes, but just short of 27 minutes today.
It was good. I think he kind of nailed what he wanted to expect from a press conference, right? He came out confident, came out humble, came out, analytical. We talked about, hey, things aren't going to be built in a day. We have to reflect on our process. He talked about process quite often, which I liked. It seemed like it was a big collaboration effort as well. Peters didn't seem like he had a really strong vision of what he wanted to do right now. He wanted to talk to his coach first, talk to the owner first, which I liked. I think having that humble grace is kind of what we're looking for. But, that and the fact that Harris was out there, I was really happy that Harris basically, stood out front. He spoke with confidence. He had a good vision as well. So it just seems like right now my big takeaway is there's a collaborative front between everybody. It seems like they do want to get some high-profile candidates in the building, and it seems like it's going to be a well-thought-out process. And they're expecting bumps in the road, but they're going to be confident about the future. So I like that.
Mark, the owner and the new GM were on a first-name basis. That alone is a big step from the last guy who refused. But in all sincerity, the two of them sounded like they were old high school buddies. They had known each other for a long time. Mark, what were your thoughts? It felt like they've got the beginning of what they think can be something successful.
Yeah, I think it certainly was nice to not hear Mr. Harris or Mr. Snyder. It was definitely nice to hear them talk by their first names and not have it be like this guy is the authority and we all report to him. Like, yes, Josh Harris is going to be the guy with the ultimate say because he's the owner, but it's as George talked about, it's a collaboration. It's a collaborative process, and people are going to have their say, and people are going to have different opinions, and they're going to discuss that stuff. So, I don't think it was a particularly groundbreaking press conference. They gave fairly generic answers, the kind of stuff that you would expect, and I think a good part of the reason for having the press conference now before Peters has been able to actually do anything is that they kind of avoid the question on the quarterback right now, and they avoid the question on, it's who you're looking for a head coach, and it's we're working through that right now, and we're interviewing a bunch of different candidates, and obviously he kind of took the obvious answer of saying like it's not about offense or defense, it's about the best leader, which I think just about any GM would probably say. And then he was able to avoid basically any questions about the roster or the quarterback and the talent level of the team. Like, he was able to get fairly generic things and say, we're evaluating everything, and once we hire our coaching staff and collaborate with the coaches, then we'll be able to evaluate where we're at with the roster. And obviously that makes sense, but that kind of helps that he doesn't have to really put any thought into answering a tough question like, what are you going to do with a quarterback? What do you think of Sam Howell? And are you going to draft one or two, and that kind of thing. So I think it was a fairly easy press conference for him to give, but it certainly wasn't bad.
I thought one of the interesting things, he used the word when the owner Josh Harris is asked about one of the things that he liked about Peters, one of the things that intrigued him, and he used the word Peters knows how to find the edges. And I spent all of last season talking with a lot of the analytics guys from ESPN and the Matt Waldmans of the world, and the Seth Walters, and those guys will tell you all the time that the best in the business are always looking for the edges. It's the little pieces on the edges that add the wins. And I thought that was fast. And that is an analytics term. I mean, that's all over what these guys do. Thought that was interesting. We got that they'll build through the draft and kind of supplement with free agency, which I like. Again, things that you would expect them to say. But I just thought that the collaboration, I thought the line, we can't even begin to evaluate quarterbacks until we have the head coach in the building to be getting his kind of opinion, shows you what the plan is moving forward. George, it's the first time we've tried a whole bunch of these, right? I think when we brought in Shanahan, we thought, okay, everybody wanted McLuhan, and we were all excited when he got here. But this really is the first time since Casserly, maybe, that we're actually getting a football man running the operation that will be using advisors to his best benefits. It's exciting, man, because we've never quite done it like this.
I agree. I think the biggest takeaway is that even Adam Peters said it during his conference. It's a very exciting opportunity. He took the job because there's so many different ways he can go.
Turn down jobs.
He turned down jobs to build this team in his image, right? Having the number 2 overall pick, having that much salary cap space, having autonomy from his owner, an owner that was hands off, that will give him the resources to be successful, but not necessarily force him to do anything. Like Adam Peters expressed it at the conference. We talk about it as fans. We talk about it on Twitter, and it sounds good in theory, but if you don't do it with fidelity, it's not actually done very well. So the fact that Adam Peters actually does feel like it's a new opportunity, something different in DC. And I think the biggest differentiator is our owner. Like I think with Dan Snyder, he essentially would give people power at first, but then over time slowly take it away or slowly influence himself or get impatient and kind of instill that onto the people making decisions and undercut them. Like I truly believe, and I believe it's because Harris is a true businessman. I think he has too many assets to worry about. He has so many different teams. He can't be all in on one. Like, he has to manage the Sixers and the Devils and the soccer team in England. He has, all those different things, Crystal Palace. He has to balance all of that because you can't be everywhere at once. So I think Peters will be an advisor to him. He'll give him his insight, give him his feedback. But I think it's going to be more of a delegation, more of a chief of staff kind of dynamic, which I appreciate. I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm excited about it.
And also, I think I could listen to Josh Harris do press conferences all the time. Like
Sharp, right?
You can tell that he's been around smart people. He's a smart person. I thought it was interesting. He brought up IQ today as something that's important for people that you're around. Okay, let's get into some of the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. Also was with Harbaugh in Michigan and turned that defense around. He has been the only guy really to shut down some of these offensive this year that have really put up big numbers. As we do these each week, I think it's important to remind everybody that we're not in meetings. We hear all the time about leadership is more important than all these things. We don't know what kind of leaders they are until we hear from other people. All we can do is break down what we think it'll look like on the field. Today, I'm excited about this one, Mark.
Yeah, well, we've got Mike MacDonald with the Ravens. He obviously there's the discussion to be had whether you go for a defensive-minded head coach or whether you go for an offensive-minded head coach, and the scheme plays a factor. And obviously, in an ideal world, you want to have an offensive-minded coach to keep that continuity, especially when you're likely to be drafting a quarterback. But the situation might be that Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or whatever offensive mind isn't necessarily the best leader. Maybe that best leader is a defensive mind. Maybe it's Mike MacDonald. Maybe it's Raheem Morris. Maybe it's someone else. And you can't just go for an offensive guy. So yeah, you have to bear that in mind. And obviously, we're not behind the scenes, as you said. We're not in meeting rooms. We don't know exactly how these guys are as leaders in the locker room. But going back to Mike MacDonald, he runs a really, really one of the best defenses in the league, if not the best defense, probably. And I thought we'd have a little run through and see what makes them so good. So we can start off here where the main thing about McDonald's defense, if there's one word to describe it, it would be disguise. And you hear that a lot around the league. You hear defensive coordinators and head coaches say, our defense is all about disguise, and we want to disguise what our intentions are and not let the offense know what we're doing. But the trend around the league has been, well, we'll just sit in 2 high coverages and look like we're going to play quarters and maybe rotate out of it, and that's the extent of disguise. Mike MacDonald takes that up another notch, and he really disguises things. And the way he does that is he plays with the kind of man zone indicators that offenses use. So right here, against the Lions, against Ben Johnson, we see they've got a receiver here that's going to go across the formation in motion, and normally this would be a man zone indicator for the offense. If a defender follows him in motion, typically that would indicate it's going to be man coverage. If the defender stays there and the whole defense kind of shuffles across a gap, then that would suggest it's going to be zone coverage. So what they're going to do here is the Ravens are going to take their slot corner, and he's going to follow this receiver in motion across the formation. So that would indicate to the offense that they're likely getting man coverage. So as we see them running across here, they're communicating stuff, and it looks like it's going to be man coverage. So Jared Goff is thinking it's going to be man coverage. But what actually happens is the Ravens, despite doing that motion and showing that man indicator, what they actually do is they bail out to cover 2 or Tampa 2. And they don't just play Tampa 2, they get there weirdly. So that corner that followed that guy in motion is actually bailing all the way out to this deep half of the field.
Wow.
And then the other safety that was initially deep and kind of walked up into the box, he's going to be playing that middle hole that the Mike linebacker normally plays. Then you're going to have your 2 linebackers that are going to split into these hook curl zones, and then you're going to have the 2 corners that will play outside and flat. And the other safety still plays the other deep half. And so the result of that is the offense thinks they're getting man coverage. So Jared Goff is looking for, they've got what's known as a arches concept or a quick seam concept. You've got this receiver, Josh Reynolds, running a shallow cross, and you've got this tight end running what's called a quick seam, where he just kind of steps up here and tries to cut inside. And typically, if you're getting man coverage, this is a really good look. You think you're going to get the linebackers are going to follow this shallow cross, and then you're going to get this guy one-on-one with this linebacker, and he's going to get inside and be a nice, easy completion. But they actually drop off into zone. And so you get to this picture, and suddenly you've got 3 defenders in the middle of the field in zone coverage, all staring at Jared Goff, going, where are you going with the ball? I'm ready to jump on it. And Jared Goff's here thinking, well, I thought I was getting man coverage. I'm going to try to hit this guy. But now I've suddenly got 3 guys in position ready to jump my route. So actually, what am I doing? And all it takes with these disguises is to get the quarterback to hold on to the ball for just that extra second or 2. And as you can see here, defensive tackle is breaking through the protection. Jared Goff has that little moment of hesitation because this route that he wanted to go to is suddenly covered, and he gets sacked and he ends up fumbling and losing the ball. So that was an example of, yeah, go ahead.
Go back a second, Mark. I loved watching that play. That was fantastic. So, like, speaking of which, in regard to having that slight hesitation for a quarterback, like, if you actually go through it step by step, frame by frame, right after the snap, like that, I think that's amazing because he does have to hesitate because even at this point, it still looks like potential man coverage. Like, he has to hang on for a little bit longer to even decipher. Like, he probably doesn't tell his zone till probably right now, about like a second or 2 into his drop back. So there is a hesitation there. Jared Goff's a veteran as well. So I think that's a great disguisement. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and
we also have premier linebackers, right?
Great linebackers.
Yeah,
for sure.
Having good players certainly helps, and the main point is having the communication between those players, because
That's right.
being able to send this guy started off over here covering the slot, right, and now he's ending up on basically the opposite side of the field, back deep. So it's a very hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of communication and making sure everyone's on the same page to do this kind of thing. But when you can do it well, like the Ravens do here, like you said, Jared Goff is ready to throw this. He's almost starting to begin his throwing motion, but suddenly spots this linebacker is right there ready to jump this, and he can't do it. So he has to hold on to the ball, and you can already see this defensive tackle has broken through and gets the sack. So that was an example of disguising zone coverage as man. But if you just disguise zone coverage as man the whole time, the offense is going to catch on. So Mike MacDonald takes up a level. He also disguises man coverage as zone. So here we've got that 2-deep safety look, the split safety look that I was talking about, which is used around the NFL to disguise things and try to give as vanilla a look as possible. They've also got this corner here, Marlon Humphrey. He's in a zone technique. You would normally have like the corner, if he doesn't have a receiver outside, he'll walk inside to the next receiver, which would be tight end George Kittle here, and he'd be responsible for a run fit here. Then you've got Kyle Hamilton over the slot, and Kyle Hamilton does play over the slot sometimes, but you wouldn't necessarily have him lined up directly over a slot receiver. Usually it would be over a bigger body like a tight end or maybe a running back or something like that. You wouldn't necessarily match him up on a slot receiver, but he's over the slot. So everything here is indicating that this is zone coverage. And again, we have a little motion across the formation to try to unveil what the Ravens are trying to do. And when we see this receiver go in motion, rather than having a linebacker or Kyle Hamilton or something follow him across the formation as you typically would in man coverage, what happens is everyone slides across like they would in zone coverage, and Humphrey ends up going outside, and that makes it look like zone coverage. So we'll run this on a little bit here, and you'll see he goes across in coverage, and everyone just kind of bumps over a little bit. And then Humphrey what ends up happening, here we go, is they end up playing man coverage. So you get Humphrey covering that receiver in motion. You got one safety coming down to match George Kittle. You get a linebacker going out to match McCaffrey in the flat. You have the other linebacker playing in the hole, ready for any kind of crossing route. And then you actually get Kyle Hamilton working over the slot receiver and this outside corner working this guy. And then you get the other safety that was back deep. So again, you have those two split safeties. This safety steps up to cover George Kittle. The other safety rotates deep. So again, it looks completely like zone, works out exactly like man. And so again, Brock Purdy, as he drops back to pass, he initially is thinking he's getting some kind of zone coverage. But as the play rolls on, you'll see he just has to hesitate in the pocket a little bit more. He eventually finds the guy he wants to throw to, but he's a little bit late, and that allows this corner to make up ground and break up the pass before it gets there. So again, he's able to disguise man coverage as zone. He's able to disguise zone coverage as man. And he does a real nice job of mixing things up so that coordinators and quarterbacks are never quite sure of exactly what's coming on any given play, even with, all the different ways of indicating things with formations and motions and shifts and stuff. All those pre-snap indicators, he does a great job of messing with those just to get the quarterback off schedule and make him hold the ball for a little bit longer. So,
hey, Mark.
So yeah, yep.
Was there any tendencies that you've noticed with him? Was he more of a zone type of, cover 3 zone kind of defensive coordinator, or a man type of defensive coordinator? Does he show a lot of aggression and blitzes? Have you seen anything in regard to that so far?
Yeah, well, there's one or two tendencies which we'll come on to here, but in terms of man zone splits, I believe it was fairly even. It was fairly even in terms of whether he played with a single safety in the middle of the field before the snap or whether it was 2 deep safeties. So again, he tried to keep everything relatively even to keep the offense from knowing what was happening. And so that all blends into the element of disguise, because if you're playing zone the entire time, they know you're going to play zone. If you're playing man the entire time, they know you're going to play man. If you truly want to disguise things, you have to be able to play a little bit of everything and mix things up really well. And that's, as we just saw, that's something that MacDonald does really well. But one of the tendencies he does have is he loves to use what's called sim pressures or simulated pressures, which we've talked about a fair bit on here before. But for a refresher for anyone that doesn't know, a simulated pressure it's still a 4-man rush, but you get to the 4th man doesn't come from the defensive line. Sometimes the 3rd man doesn't come from the defensive line. But if we look at this play here, typically you would have these 4 down these 4 down linemen. So you got your 2 defensive tackles and your 2 edge rushers. Normally, if you're rushing just 4, it's going to be all 4 of those guys rushing and all the rest of the back 7 dropping into coverage. But what simulated pressures do is they play with protection schemes. And so when the offensive line is thinking, okay, we're getting 4, we might slide this way to this is Davian Clowney here on the edge. Maybe we want to slide to him to try to help protect against him. Then you actually drop him off into coverage, and you bring the slot corner off the other side. And that just kind of, if the protection's sliding one way, you get the free rusher off the other side. And all they do behind it is play a basic cover 3 scheme. You've got your 2 corners bailing deep. You've got your safety. Again, it's a split safety coverage, so it looks like it's something else, but so it's disguised well. But this safety goes deep. This safety comes up and plays the flat. Jadeveon Clowney, as I say, off the edge, bails into the flat. And then you have your 2 linebackers playing in the hook curl zones. And then this slot corner comes off the edge. So as we run it on here, you'll see this line does kind of slide left. The tight end does end up staying in to help protect. So that helps kind of negate this slot corner blitzing. But what you see, the result here is you've got 3 offensive linemen here trying to block 1 guy. And this center is trying to come back this way to try to help out, thinking that he is getting overloaded this way. But that's, again, it's you've got everyone was sliding this way thinking Jadeveon Clowney's going to rush and you're going to need to double up on him. But Clowney's off in coverage here, and you've ended up getting 3 offensive linemen covering 1 defensive tackle and all getting overloaded on this side. And the result of that is that the tight end and the running back both end up coming across to try to pick up this slot corner. So they both end up staying in, which means there's only 3 receivers out running routes. And it's very hard to beat a cover 3 scheme when you've got 7 defenders in coverage, when you've only got 3 receivers running routes. And so this linebacker actually does a really nice job identifying the slot, running this little over route and matching it. And Joe Burrow is sat in the pocket trying to hope for this guy to beat that coverage. He doesn't get there. He gets pressured, does a nice job avoiding the sack, and ends up scrambling and gets a solid gain. But, it's nowhere near what they would have wanted on the play when they initially called it. And they certainly wouldn't have wanted to be overloaded on one side and having the tight end and the running back both have to stay in to block and not be able to run routes. So that was one example of a sim pressure. This is another example where the coverage for the defense is exactly the same. It's the same cover 3. You've got a split safety with one of the safeties dropping down to the flat, the other safety rotating to the deep middle. You've got your 2 outside cornerbacks both playing the deep thirds outside. But this time, instead of having the slot corner blitz off the edge, you have the slot corner dropping into the flat, and the linebacker on the other side of the field joins the rush. So again, it's still just a 4-man rush, but you're getting 2 defensive tackles, an edge rusher, and the middle linebacker all rushing off the same side. And then you get this linebacker kind of fakes blitzing, but ends up dropping back into coverage. And then again, Clowney on this side drops off into coverage. And instead of playing the flat, he actually plays a hook curl, which is a tough assignment for a guy like Clowney, but he does a nice job of it. So, and what you'll see here is, again, they fake that blitz. The line's all sliding this way towards Clowney. And what that means is you get the linebacker coming up here, and the running back's going to have to try to come and pick him up. And the left guard is already struggling with one of the defensive tackles inside, so he's going to get pressure. You've got the running back trying to pick up the linebacker, and if you've got a nice linebacker that can blitz, you're always favoring that matchup anyway. And the quarterback ends up getting pressured and basically having to throw this ball away. So it's the same principle. You'll see again here. This defensive tackle penetrates nicely. But the idea here is, again, you've got the line sliding away from where the blitz is coming from, which means this running back has to do a really nice job of executing this play fake and then getting back to pick up this linebacker and try to pick up this blitz. He doesn't do a bad job, but unfortunately the guard struggles with the defensive tackle and the defensive tackle gets through, and actually the linebacker kind of runs him over as well. And then Burrow has to end up throwing it away. So that kind of sim pressure is stuff that he does a lot on first down, at first and second down, to get them into third and longs. And this one, again, is another version of a simulated pressure. This one, I think, was a third down. It might have been second and long. But it's just another version of how they can play a relatively safe coverage. This is Tampa 2 this time. But it looks like
quick remark. I think it's interesting because I know a lot of people complain during the last season and over the years, but the idea of dropping these edges, back into coverage so that you can blitz from a different angle is something that most defenses do. I always find it interesting, when people complain about, they dropped Chase Young into coverage, or they drop Montez Sweat into coverage. Like, well, Yeah, you do that every once in a while so you can bring the blitz from another area, hoping to catch them off guards. I just think it's interesting that people complain about that, but it's something that most defenses do.
And to that end, I kind of like what Mark was kind of alluding to. Like, I would say, looking at this so far, he's like moderately aggressive. Like, I don't think he overcommits and kind of like does like.
I looked it up real quick, George. They blitzed 28% of the time this year, up 7% from last year for them, but still, I think good for 11th in the league.
That's perfect. That's what you kind of want, right? I feel like it's not an overcommit. It's not a cover zero. It's not a dangerous type of blitz. It's more of like, as Mark kind of alluded to, it's kind of simulating pressure and kind of trying to dictate the offense with kind of like teasing them and kind of manipulating what they're seeing. But if you actually look at it, the coverage is actually pretty sound, right? Like there's one person blitzing on all the last 3 clips. There's been four blitzers coming upfield. It hasn't been an overcommit to the blitz. It's kind of been a hiding of that. And then, essentially there is enough people to drop back. 7 people are dropping back to prevent the big plays from happening. So it's a pretty good balance, I think.
And 3 or 4 first rounders on this defense too.
Yeah, so do we in theory, but we'll talk about that later.
not a linebacker and not a corner.
Exactly.
Yeah, having the talent certainly helps, but the Ravens don't have a star edge rusher. Like their top two edge rushers were Van Noy and Clowney, and both of them were free agents that were signed in like August. And I think in Van Noy's case, I think they'd even started the season before they signed him. So it's not like those guys were like highly prized free agents. They were added late, so they didn't have a star edge rusher, and they have Justin, is it Matabuike or something like that? I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but he had a kind of a breakout year at defensive tackle. But they don't have Aaron Donald and Von Miller and those star edge rushers. Like they have to figure out different ways of creating pressure, and these simulated pressures are a real nice way of doing that because it's about system and scheme over personnel. Like if you have amazing talent up front, if you were the 49ers and you've got 1 million first-round picks on the defensive line that you can just rotate in and out, you can just say, okay, front four, go and rush, and we'll run some stunts, and we'll probably blow up most offensive lines. But if you don't have that, you have to think of different ways to scheme up pressure, and you have to look at the protection schemes that offenses are using and try to figure out ways to attack those protection schemes. And one of those ways of doing that is if you get a team that likes to slide the line one way or the other, if they're sliding left, blitz from the right side. If they're sliding right, blitz from the left side. They can't deal with, they'll be overloaded. They'll have enough bodies in theory to block the number of guys you're sending. But if they're targeted the wrong way, it's the same thing we talked about all season with Howell and Washington, is they often had enough bodies in to protect, but they weren't being targeted in the right direction, and the line would slide left and the blitz would come from the right, and they wouldn't be able to pick everything up, and Howell would get sacked. So if you're able to identify the protection schemes and attack them like this, it's a much safer way of generating pressure and a much more consistent way of generating pressure. This one here is just another example of a sim pressure. This time, instead of cover 3, they're running Tampa 2, and this one, I can't remember whether this was second or third down, but it was the first down markers here, so it was a second or third and 10 or long, and so they're all lined up on the line of scrimmage. They're making it look like it's going to be a cover 0 blitz and a real aggressive blitz, but actually most of them are dropping off into coverage, and they're just playing a base safe Tampa 2, and the slot corner is going to come off the edge. And again, it's simulated pressure. So they've loaded up this side of the line, hoping that the line will slide that way. They've managed to bait the Bengals into having their running back step up and be ready to block the A gaps if one of these linebackers comes. And the idea here is that the protection all goes to the left, and the corner comes free off the right side. And so as we run this on, we'll see what happens. You see all these guys bail out. Suddenly it's just a few guys blocking. And again, you've got 3 guys on this side of the line blocking 1 defensive tackle, and you've got everyone here engaged with a free cornerback coming to blitz. So it's, again, they have enough numbers in there to block the 4 rushers, but because they didn't know where the 4th rusher was coming from, the Ravens were able to scheme up getting this free rusher. And Joe Burrow does a real nice job of seeing that actually I've got this free rusher. My first read wasn't there. I'm just going to turn and throw this ball away before I get hit. And he ends up throwing it out of bounds. He does a great job. And yeah, this is actually a great angle right here.
In theory, Mark, the way to beat the blitz is to throw right over it, right? So I feel like Joe Burrow sees the blitz coming, maybe throw it right over that defender, but it's a really tight squeeze. You see one Raven kind of shooting across the other. The linebacker's closing that gap, and the cornerback's closing that gap. But at least he's looking for it right there, which I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, he was looking that way, thinking about hitting the corner out on this side, but the flat defender, the corner on the outside, was just sinking underneath it. And so that was enough to make Burrow go, okay, that's not quite safe. And then he's able to recognize, actually, I'm hot here because I've got these two linemen are both covered by these two defensive tackles. The running back is releasing inside. You've got the center here blocking nobody, and you've got these two blocking one guy, which means this corner is coming completely free. So he knows that ball needs to come out, and it needs to come out now. So he just shifts the other side and throws it away before getting a pretty nice hit on him there. So, and then, of course, as we talked about, he doesn't just look to play zone coverage when he does these simulated pressures. Most people, when you do a simulated pressure, you're doing that to have what they call a safe blitz, where you're still only rushing 4, but you're still dropping 7 into coverage, and you're able to play some sort of zone coverage. What MacDonald does on this one is he plays man coverage. Again, this is against the Lions. What you have here is you're still only having 4 rushers. This looks confusing, but it sorts itself out. You've got the 2 edge rushers, this guy and this guy. They're both rushing. You've got the slot corner also joining the rush, and you've also got this linebacker joining the rush. And to accommodate the corner, the linebacker, and the 2 edge rushers joining the rush, both defensive tackles are going to start like they're going to rush, and then they're going to pop out. And now Mike MacDonald isn't naive. He doesn't think, I can drop these 2 350-pound defensive tackles into coverage and have them match a tight end down the seam. He knows that their job is just get into this throwing lane in the middle of the field, because, as you said, when there's a blitz coming, the best place to throw is throw over it. So if they think this blitz is coming from this linebacker, Jared Goff is going to want to just throw straight over it. So you have these 2 just pop out into this throwing lane and force that quarterback to hold onto the ball for just an extra second, and that's going to be all it takes. So we'll run this through here. They send a guy in motion, and again, they shuffle it across rather than follow it. So again, it's another zone indication to the quarterback instead of a man indication. But what they end up doing is actually they play man across the board. You can see safeties match up with the receivers. The corner matches up with the outside receiver. You got Humphreys here down on, I think that's Sam Laporta. And then you've got the running back with the linebacker. And now you've got your 2 defensive tackles step forward to engage, I believe it's the right guard and center, to force them to commit to blocking this side. But then they actually, as I say, they pop out into those quick throwing lanes. So if this turns out to be a quick slant, or if this one breaks inside, you're suddenly going to have these guys pop into the throwing lanes. And again, you're not asking them to cover these guys. You're just asking them to essentially get into that throwing lane and stop the quarterback making the throw immediately. And so what you end up having is you have right tackle engaged in a block. You have the right guard and the center both temporarily engaged in blocks. You have the left guard blocking the blitzing linebacker, and you have the left tackle blocking the other edge rusher, which means this slot corner is going to come completely free off the edge. So you got Jared Goff is currently thinking it's zone. Suddenly it's now man. He's thinking he's getting a heavy blitz, but actually he's not. And then these defensive tackles jump out into the throwing lanes, and you can see Goff kind of starts to look this way and is thinking, I'm getting this guy breaking in, but actually this defensive tackle is going to break into that throwing lane. And you can see he starts to look that way, but then suddenly he realizes, actually, I don't have this throwing lane because this defensive tackle is jumping in the way. And now I've got this corner off the edge completely free, and I'm in trouble, and he's sacked. So that was all the different kinds of, well, that's not all the different kinds of pressures, but basically they can get to these simulated pressures where they can play man or zone. They can play pretty much any coverage they want to, and they just switch up who the 4th rusher is. It's not always the front 4. It quite often is a linebacker or a slot corner. Sometimes it's a safety, but they can still play their safe coverages behind it, and they can mess around with protection schemes and get free rushers that way.
So I got a question for you, Mark, when you're ready.
Yeah, go for it.
So I love that. I think it's really intriguing. I think it baits the offense. I think it kind of dictates the offense as well. How does that compare to Jack Del Rio? Like, I know you kind of had more of an analytical eye, more of a, you watching more film more closely than I do. Did Jack Del Rio have a lot of deception in his defense as well? Have you seen anything like this? Any parallels at all?
So last year, no, or this season, no. Del Rio didn't really do much of this. Well, he occasionally did, but this year was more about just playing man coverage and not doing it very well. When they were really good in that stretch towards the end of last season being the 2022 season, when they were playing really good ball, they obviously they had Chase Young wasn't quite back healthy yet, and Montez Sweat missed some time. And the way they made up for not having those guys is using a lot of those simulated pressures we talked about, because you have guys like Casey Toohill and James Smith-Williams that you can drop into coverage, especially Toohill. Toohill was a linebacker in college, so you can be very comfortable dropping him into coverage off the edge and bringing a rusher from the other side. And that was stuff that they did quite well in 2022, those simulated pressures. But and I thought that was probably going to be the way they were going to go about it once they traded Sweat and Young this year, was they were going to rely on those simulated pressures. But they didn't really go back to that. They kind of just went, well, we're just going to see what these young defensive ends can do, and we're just going to keep rushing the front four. And it got very vanilla, and we saw how those defensive ends did. So, it wasn't particularly good this year. In years past, Del Rio did mix in some of those sim pressures that he didn't. I think the thing that separates what MacDonald does consistently and what Del Rio did for that half a season was MacDonald quite clearly has a really strong understanding of different protection schemes and when offenses are going to use their different protection schemes, what situations and what looks they're going to use them in. And when you understand those protection schemes, you know which simulated pressures you can run. Like if you know the offensive line is going to slide right, you know you can bring that extra rusher or that simulated rush off the left and vice versa. So I think that's what MacDonald does better than what Del Rio did. Del Rio ran a fair few sim pressures, but quite often they were quite easy to pick up because he ran them into the line slide rather than away from where the line was sliding. So that's what separates them is MacDonald has a stronger understanding of protection schemes and scouting when those schemes are used and then how to attack them. So
I don't know if you guys saw, I think it was Marlon Humphreys has a podcast he does, and they were asking him about MacDonald, and he said MacDonald will be sitting there watching tape in the locker room, like up to the very last minute that they go out there trying to, as we talked about at the beginning, to find the little edges where they can win battles. And Mark, I'm curious if you saw anything particular that stood out. And so, I mean, this defense not only being historically great this year in a lot of different categories. I mean, they shut down the Lions we looked at. They shut down the 49ers. They shut down the Dolphins this year. I mean, a lot of these high-flying offenses, did you notice anything in particular? Did he just outmaneuver them? Did he just win those chess matches? I'm curious if what you saw, because I mean, really, the defense was incredible this year.
Yeah, it really was, and I think it comes down to what we were talking about, where he has such an extensive knowledge of what the offense is going to do and what situations they're going to do them, those things, and he knows how to attack the protection schemes. And because he's like the old adage is, if you can get pressure with four, it's very hard for the offense to do anything. And so, like all of these sim pressures, they are just 4-man rushes. So, and they're getting consistent pressure with them. So it's very hard for opposing offenses to do much. And so when you're able to, on first and second down, use these sim pressures and stop the offense from picking up chunks and keep them in third and long, then you can get into a real exotic blitz package if you want to on third down, or you can just play coverage on third down. You have quite a lot of options when the offense is in third and long, and the offense, every offensive coordinator in the league will tell you there's only so many things we can run on third and long. If it's very hard for offenses to consistently move the chains if they're in third and long situations all day, and that's what the Ravens are really good at doing is on first and second down, they'll run these sim pressures at you and they'll disguise things and they'll make it really hard to just consistently move the chains and stay ahead of the chains. And that sets up the third and long stuff, and it's real hard to make a living that way. So
Mark, do the Commanders have enough linebacker play to be able to run this? I mean, how much do they rely on
Good
these
question.
incredible linebackers that they have? I mean, they ponied up a lot for Roquan Smith. You can see why. Patrick Queen, I know, is set to be a free agent. I doubt they let him get out of there. He's been much better now that he's sitting next to Roquan. But how big is the gap here? Can we run this thing with the linebackers we have?
Yes and no. It's for me. It's more about the scheme, and yes, having those star players really does help, and it can elevate things. But it's more about the scheme and how he's identifying, which way the line's sliding and who I can send to rush against it from the opposite side and overload them. And when you're able to do that consistently, it doesn't really matter who's the one rushing and who's the one dropping into coverage, because the quarterback is sat there going, oh, that's not what I thought was happening. I'm having to hold on to the ball just to process this and be like, okay, what's actually happening here? And by the time he's figured it out, he's getting hit. So that's not to say it's a completely scheme over personnel. Like every coach in the league will tell you it's all about the players that you have. But it's not like Washington. The bigger question for me is whether Washington has the players that can communicate this kind of defense. Like,
yes, for sure.
We saw that first play with playing what looked like man and switching into zone, where you have the slot corner running across the field, looking like he's playing man coverage, and then suddenly bailing off into a deep path. Like, that's not an easy thing to do, and that requires a lot of communication and making sure everyone's on the same page. And Washington, as we've seen over the last few years, the number of times we've talked about communications issues and coverage breakdowns from not having things picked up properly and everyone on the same page, like that is the bigger question for me, is whether they have the guys that can communicate.
And to that end, we don't have to dwell on it too much, but one of my favorite, we all have our pulse in the team, John Keim. I love John Keim, great reporter. He talks about, with his intel with the coaches, that the team is actively looking for a veteran safety because there wasn't a lot of communication in the back end of the defensive backfield. Like Percy Butler's naturally isn't a vocal person. Derek Forrest is pretty athletic, but he was not necessarily an alpha with communication as well. So it would behoove them to get a veteran safety to be part of that group, because all of them are pretty young back there. And Cam Crow's a great player as well, but he's more of a, I'm going to do my job and lead by example as opposed to speaking out there. But you have to have communication, especially with more complex concepts. So something to keep an eye on for this offseason.
Yeah, and the thing I would put on top of that is that they have players that certainly have the talent to run this. Like, if Cam Curl is so versatile that he can play any of those roles, like we saw with Kyle Hamilton being playing deep sometimes, or playing over the slot, or what have you. Cam Curl can do that, and the coverage that we saw with the slot corner following in motion and bailing to the deep half, Quan Martin did that every other week in college, because he was a guy that they had splitting time between the nickel spot and the safety spot at I think it was Syracuse. He was in college, wasn't it? Or was it Illinois? I can't remember. Illinois, right. Illinois. They did a lot of that.
Quan started playing well down the stretch.
He did. And so it's definitely something that they can do, and something that suits his game, that using that versatility. And so they have some personnel that can do this stuff, but it's whether they can. Yeah, having a veteran back there that can help communicate probably would help, and certainly a second linebacker to go along with Jamin Davis would really help. So,
and assuming they can't make like wholesale changes to the defense in year one, it feels like this will be an extreme litmus test for coaching. Right? Like, if you run back a lot of the same players, I think they'll have to add some edges in free agency, probably is the way they'll go there. But it'll be very interesting to see what a new voice, a new mantra, whatever it is you want to call it, in the building with some of these same guys that we thought had a lot of potential and promise, and it feels like they've had a hard time getting there. It's going to be very interesting to see how much coaching plays into this thing.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So as we're moving on here, we've got we talked about the simulated pressures and rushing with 4, and that's something Mike MacDonald does really well on first and second down. Very occasionally, or more than occasionally, but he likes to mix in the odd 5-man rush as well. And typically when you're rushing 5, you're thinking we're playing man coverage behind it. But of course, Mike MacDonald never likes to do what offenses think is the typical way of doing things. So what we see here is a fire zone or a zone blitz, where you're dropping into, you've got your 2 outside corners drop into a deep third. You've got the free safety in the middle of the field playing a deep middle. And then you've got 3 underneath zones. So you effectively got 3 deep, 3 under, almost like a cover 3, but it's only 3 under instead of 4. And that's because that extra guy is joining the rush. And so what we have here is the 49ers, they send their running back in motion. And at first it looks like it's going to be man coverage and this linebacker is going to follow him out in motion. But actually this linebacker is blitzing off the edge. The 49ers don't have anyone ready to block him. You can see they've got 3 rushes here, just to 2 offensive linemen. Again, they catch the slide going the other way. And Patrick Queen comes off the edge and very nearly gets to Brock Purdy before he can throw it. He does manage to get the ball out to Christian McCaffrey, but they make that tackle very short of the chains and they only pick up a minimum gain. And again, you see he's going out in motion. It looks like he's following him in man coverage, but actually he's blitzing off the edge and it's zone coverage. And Purdy doesn't have much chance to process it. He's just being like, oh, crap, this guy's here. I'm hot. I've got to throw this ball to the flat and get rid of the ball. And it's just as well he did, because if he didn't, then he was going to get sacked. But even so, they're picking up 2 or 3 yards max there. And then I thought we'd talk a little bit again about kind of coverage disguises. We've talked a lot about what pressure and how they get pressure up front. The Ravens are also very good in coverage. And as we've seen, they split between zone and man coverage, and then they like to disguise things. And down here in the red zone, you've got what appears to be like a little quarters coverage, and you've got 2 safeties back deep, again, trying to disguise things. But what they're actually doing, they've got a little triangle coverage. So you've got this corner out here is locked man-to-man with this receiver. This corner is locked man-to-man with this receiver. And then you've got these 2 guys in the slot. You've got 3 defenders over them. And this is what a lot of the quarters coverages in the NFL try to do now. They try to get +1 in coverage. So you'll see triangle coverages where you get 3 over 2. You'll see box coverages where you get 4 over 3. So if this receiver was in a bunch, you'd probably end up getting one of these 2, either the slot corner or the outside corner playing back here, and it would make like a box or a diamond, and you'd have a 4 over 3. But here, with this guy outside, they're just going to let this guy match up man-to-man, and then they're going to play a little zone match with 3 over 2. And so Joe Burrow actually does a pretty nice job here reading through what they do here. They have this guy going outside, and what happens is both the safety and the slot corner end up taking the inside receiver on his outside route, which leaves what looks like this linebacker trying to pick up a slot receiver on his little post route. And what you see is Joe Burrow. I did draw it right. So Joe Burrow is looking at this thinking, okay, I've got the safety in the slot corner trying to cover this guy, and I'm going to have this receiver coming straight across the middle of the field, wide open, running behind a linebacker. That's an easy win. So I'm just going to throw that. What he doesn't see is this safety on the backside, rather than attaching to this route. Because as I said, they've got this guy locked up man to man. They've got this guy locked up man to man. That leaves this safety being able to watch the quarterback, and he watches Burrow, reads Burrow looking this way, and sees that this is where the threat is. So he comes across. Burrow makes that throw over the middle, and the safety picks it and then takes it back for a nice return. So again, it plays into – yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go back like 10 seconds if you don't mind.
Yep.
That's a great defensive play. Wouldn't Burrow's best look be the one-on-one man coverage on the bottom of the screen? Shouldn't he have gone there instead, or is it just so bang and so fast? It probably would have been, he's kind of got baited into it because, I guess it is a fast reaction, but just kind of seeing, I guess it's Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase single coverage without safety help. I feel like it'd be a great opportunity to throw the ball in the end zone, but walk me through it. It's better than me.
What Burrow is probably assuming is because this is Jamar Chase, he's probably assuming this safety is bracketing him.
Gotcha.
So I would guess he's thinking, I've got double coverage on Chase. I can work to this over here. And that plays into, again, why he thinks once he gets across to this side of the field, especially as this safety doesn't bail straight away. The safety, when he first starts, sorry, I'm running it back, but you'll see when the play starts, the safety kind of holds his position at the start, and Joe Burrow's eyes first thing go to this safety,
exactly,
and he holds his position. So he sees him thinking, okay, this is bracket coverage. I can't go to Jamar Chase. I need to go to this side of the field, and that's where he sees, oh, I've got my receiver here running against the linebacker up the seam. I've got this throw easily, and that's where the safety is able to peel off and make the play.
Got it.
It's a real nice play. So, it wasn't bad processing from Burrow. I guess in a way he didn't check the safety enough. Like you'll see it here again. His helmet darts straight to that safety, and that safety kind of holds his position. And actually gains width and depth rather than moving more towards the middle. So that's enough for Burrow to go, okay, I've got bracket on this side. It's 2-on-1. As good as Jamar Chase is, I've got better odds going to the other side of the field.
Exactly.
And then he gets to here and he's thinking, oh, I've got this receiver running behind the linebacker. This is an easy throw.
It looks wide open too. He trusts his arm. I'm going to gun it through that hole right there is what he's thinking.
Exactly. And at this point, he's not aware that this safety is reading him and coming inside. And then,
well, yeah, because he thinks the safety's still bracketing Jamar Chase at the
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was the last play I had on MacDonald. So
also you ran it back just a second before with and it just made me think of that San Francisco play. I have not seen that very often where the defender looks like he's chasing the motion man and then immediately stops and blitzed. I thought was really nice. This guy is following him across the formation, then all of a sudden just stops.
It is really cool.
Anyway, I thought it was pretty cool way to get to the blitz.
Yeah, I'll let it run through when we get to that. It is a real nice thing. Again, it speaks to that whole disguising coverage and stuff, that he takes it to the next level where he really messes with keys of what the quarterback's looking at pre-snap. And when Purdy sends McCaffrey in motion out to the flat and he sees this linebacker start to move out there, he's almost guaranteed to be thinking, okay, I've got man coverage. I know where I'm going with the ball. And as soon as this is everything screaming man coverage, and then suddenly that ball is snapped. You can see it's moved off the spot. It's snapped, and that's when he breaks and goes for the quarterback. And yes, there's McCaffrey out here in the flat, but you've got that flat defender that can go and make that tackle, and they keep that gain to 2 or 3 yards, and that's what I'm talking about. They make it real hard for you to move the ball consistently on them, and that sets up those 3rd and long plays where it's just hard sledding whatever offense you're in, whatever defense you're in. It is very hard to consistently convert 3rd and longs. So yeah, it's a very, very sound defense. It's a very well thought out defense. It's one that he clearly does a lot of advanced work on what the opposition offense is doing, and what kind of schemes and protection, particularly protection schemes they're using, and knowing how to attack them and how to catch them in slides the wrong way and things like that. So it's a real nice scheme. It's probably, well, for me, it's the best defensive scheme in the NFL currently. There's no doubt that the Ravens, for me, are the best defensive team in the league. They might well be one of the best offensive teams in the league as well with Lamar Jackson. So, they're a very good team, and Mike MacDonald deserves a hell of a lot of credit for what they do on defense.
And I had Jason Lockhart on the show on Friday, and he said that MacDonald's one of these guys that if you spend 10 minutes with him talking football, you not only realize why everybody is standing in line to hire him, but also you will have learned something, right? Just in that 10 minutes, you will have learned something about football. And so I don't know. I'm excited about why I think it. I mean, went to Michigan and immediately that defense became one of the best in the nation. So I think the concept travels and works. And I don't know which way they'll go, but he excites me as a head coach.
Mark, real quick before we start wrapping it up. So as someone that spent extensive time studying both Ben Johnson and Mike MacDonald and both of our, in our film review series over the past 2 weeks, who do you prefer so far? Do you have any preference, or they're just totally completely different entities? You can't really pick one or the other.
It's hard to really say without knowing what kind of characters and leaders they are, because that plays so much into it. Like you can go off of what you've seen in press conferences, and they both seem like they're impressive guys, and you hear reports about them both being impressive guys. So it's hard to say who's going to be the better head coach from a pure scheme standpoint. I think what MacDonald is doing in an age of offensive-driven leagues is very impressive. But I think you also give the edge more to the offensive guy, especially as you're looking at drafting a quarterback second overall, and you want to keep that continuity. And maybe MacDonald has a great plan of, I'm going to hire this offensive coordinator, and if he gets hired, then I'm going to hire the next one, or maybe he thinks to do what the Ravens have kind of done the last few years, where they hire an older offensive coordinator that isn't likely to get hired, like Greg Roman a few years ago, or this year Todd Monken has done a great job with the Ravens offense, and he's not someone that people thought of as a head coaching candidate lately. So because of his age and then stuff like that. So maybe he has a guy in mind like that, and maybe that's a better overall plan. But I think if you're just looking at Johnson straight up versus MacDonald, I guess my preference would be just slightly towards Johnson, just for the offensive factor and the being able to keep that continuity and guarantee that continuity for a young quarterback.
And I really think that's one you mentioned it kind of in passing, but I think it's really important as we're doing these things. It's another thing that we can't know, but the head coach's ability to put together a staff of teachers and the best in the business is just as important as any of the rest of this stuff we're talking about. And that's another one that we're not privy to, of course, because we're not in those meetings. But I mean, that's one of the first things they'll ask these guys, right? It's like, what is the plan for the staff? And how do we get them here? And so that, as we're doing this, it's incredibly important to remember that. Next week,
can I just add on to that point? Like, I wrote today or yesterday about Raheem Morris and his defensive scheme, and I like what Raheem Morris does from a scheme standpoint. I prefer what MacDonald does from a scheme standpoint, and I think as a defensive coordinator, I'd pick MacDonald over Raheem Morris. But what you hear about Raheem Morris being this amazing character and knowing his connections around the league, he's been around so many different places for so long, and just about everyone has rave reviews about him. I think if you're looking for a guy that's going to build out an all-star staff, I think out of all these guys, Raheem Morris is the most likely to be able to do that. Because he has that energy about him. He's been around so many different guys. He's coached on both offense and defense, and he has so many connections. Like if the staff factors into it, which obviously it does, the overall package, Raheem Morris might not be necessarily the best play caller out of these guys. Like as I say, if I'm just picking my defensive coordinator or my offensive coordinator, and just purely on scheme, I would go MacDonald or Ben Johnson over Raheem Morris. But in terms of being able to build an overall package where you're able to hire an all-star staff, and you have the best, most charismatic leader, Raheem Morris would play into that as well. And I think he probably would be able to build the best staff.
That's a great point, Mark. Next week, we'll switch it back to offense. I think you've got Bobby Slowick all geared up for us, Mark. So I'm excited about that one. Given a lot of credit for the CJ Stroud development this year. So definitely, I think we'll be high up on their list. So fellas, thank you as always. And we'll see you again next Tuesday.